lot of the people who supported him figured he's only got 4 years in him. They weren't like, I'm voting for Joe Biden because I want to give him 8 years of transforming this country.
These elections ultimately are about the future. Does anyone in this room have any fucking idea what Joe Biden's next 4 years would look like and what they're selling?
No.
It's not clear to anyone in the electorate what the next 4 years of a Joe Biden administration would deliver.
Biden has done nothing about it, and he's not going to do anything about it. He's going to pass some kind of an executive order to make it look like he cares about the border. I have a feeling Republicans are going to call him out.
The left has pushed this idea of the normal, reasonable man is actually the greatest threat you will face.
Right.
You know, where to the point that they think they're actually safer with a bear who will kill them.
I wish I could see like just a hidden cam or something on the face of voters when they go in the Democratic primary and there's 3 Bob Fergusons.
If they're voting in a Democratic primary, those voters are already very confused.
With cyber attacks on the rise, protecting your data security is more important than ever. So why is Congress considering a bill that puts your credit card data at greater risk of being hacked and exposed to foreign networks? The Durbin-Marshall credit card bill shifts billions in consumer spending to less secure payment networks, all so that corporate megastores can make bigger profits. Don't let Durbin-Marshall steal your data. Visit electronicpaymentscoalition.org and tell your senators to oppose the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill.
Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please.
Just a catching strays over here.
You're in for a hell of a show.
Keep the faith, hold the line, and own the libs.
It's time for our main event.
Welcome back to a big week here, the Ruthless Variety Program, a full cast and crew. Howdy, gentlemen. How are you?
Great to be here.
Good.
John Ashbrook, Michael Duncan, comfortably spugging myself right to left on your radio dial. Listen, there's a lot of stuff. You know, this segment of the year where all of a sudden it feels like the overdrive switch gets turned on and like there's just stuff happening all the time. I feel like we've crossed that lexicon, don't you think?
Yeah. I mean, like, typically you'd have conventional wisdom being that, oh, you know, voters, everyone, politics checks out for, like, the summer, and then they come back in the fall and start paying attention. It's starting to feel like a lot earlier than that. Like, right now, I feel like we're right in the thick of things.
Yeah, I also feel like once the legislative side of stuff slows down, you know, the political reporting really picks up for the general election. And so everything's just under the microscope and will be now until November.
Well, it is, and we're going to get to all of that and more. The place we wanted to start here on the Variety Program is just a delicious treat. For those of you who've been involved in politics for a long time, you know James Carville, sort of the architect of the Clinton 92 campaign. He's been the face and the voice of like your reasonable, smart Southern Democrat, but also just like Democratic Party over the years. And he breaks the narrative every once in a while. I can't remember him breaking the narrative more like this. Let's go to clip 1, Spaghettis.
And Trump's more ahead than he's ever been. Fewer people think January 6th was any kind of what it was, is an assault on the temple of democracy, the Constitution. I don't know whatever the fuck you want to say. It's going the wrong way. It's not working. Everything that we're throwing is spaghetti at a wall, and none of it is sticking. You know, we got to try to think of something different, because what we're doing is really, really not working.
You said it, James.
I mean, that's the thing is, show me the lie.
Yeah, show me the lie is right. I mean, that's always been his appeal, is that he's sort of like common man's the Democratic message. And so when he's up in arms,
and also
kind of what they're doing, right?
Like, you see the difference between him and where the modern Democrat Party is. It's not like he's necessarily lost touch more than he's kind of like a alert signal. Like the pilot let him know, hey, you guys are like, the nose is a bit down. Like number of times on a number of issues when Democrats were losing, he's tried to give them the heads up. And I think this is him essentially trying to give a wake up call. Like, this is looking like a mess.
Right, and somebody has to do it on their side because all the rest of the Democrats in the mainstream media are shitting on Trump every single day. And you saw over the weekend 100,000 people at a rally in New Jersey, and the media just spent all their time saying, oh, you know what? It looked more like 95. It looked more like 85,000 people. It's not that many. And
Carville's like, arguing.
Carville's like, wake up, people. What we're doing is not working, and what Trump is doing is working. And that's put us on a course to, I mean, like this morning, the New York Times Siena poll showed huge movement towards Trump, and there's lots of arguments about whether it's a little too euphoric.
Yeah, we'll get into all of that.
But there's a lot of reason for people like Jim Carville to be concerned.
Yeah, and I think also it reflects the changing leadership of the Democratic Party. You know, that so much of their message is now driven by talking heads on MSNBC and these beltway tastemakers and guys like, James Carville, who won in 1992 on what? It's the economy, stupid.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, that's the main message that ushered in Bill Clinton into the White House.
Yeah.
And the Democratic Party has gotten very far afield of that in their messaging.
Yeah, I mean, we've griped for years about how some of the, you so call them tastemakers or pundits or whatever, within the Democratic and Republican Party are people who've never won a damn thing. Increasingly on the Democratic side, sans winning whatsoever. He's one of the very few who've done that. We use that as the opener to the show because it sets sort of our meat of the program. You know how much Wolf likes meat.
Well, Wolf loves the meat.
He loves meat, and that's what it sets. So we're going to get to that. The Siena polls you mentioned, a whole bunch of that. Trump's also closing a bit of a fundraising gap. He's winning. We'll discuss all of that. A touch of variety, and then we've got a great guest today, a little outside the box. We brought a journo in here.
Can you believe it, Smug?
Yeah, I mean, I can. He's going to basically go after the swamp in this book he's releasing, so makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of is. And look, Brody Mullins is the guest. He's written an incredible new book, and you'll hear all about it. But it's basically the influence peddling industry.
I was really hoping I could get Smug to trash our own guest.
I've read his work before. He goes after the right people.
He is. He's incredible.
And he knows well enough not to trash Brody Mullins.
Yeah.
It's like you get that phone call on the other end.
Yeah.
And it's like, shit.
Yeah.
He's not quite as populist as he leads on. touch of self-preservation. With all that, we have our wonderful sponsor, fellas, Zeobiotics. So I got to tell you, I got a call the other day.
Right here, we got the product right here.
From a friend of mine who is like frantic, and he's like, "Hey, what's that thing that you guys sell again on the program? Like Biotics, something Biotics? It's like Zeobiotics." He's like, "Yeah, I need that stuff."
Yeah.
And I was like, "You're right, you do. Where are you going?" He said he was going to like some boys' golf trip or whatever, and he's like, "I need to bring a whole batch of this stuff." He's like, "Does it work? Does it work?"
Yeah. Well, I mean, here's the prime example. So, I had family in town over the weekend for Mother's Day. My sisters came back to my place. We're hanging out, making cocktails, and I keep this very pack right at where I have my cocktails. And so, true story. I said to them, before you have a sip of anything, crack one of those open.
Yeah.
I guarantee the next day you feel much better. And it did. So, like, if I'm willing to tell my family that, it's got to be the truth.
That's smart placement, though, Smug. Like keeping it there by the station
right
where
there.
you make the drink, so you're always
a reminder,
reminded mentally. My cousin a while back texted me a photo of his Zeobiotics, and it just said, "Thanks for the promo code," which I
there's
appreciate.
science involved,
There
Michael.
is. It was developed by a PhD scientist.
Listen, Ashbrook's going to take the science role
I
this
looked
time
into
around.
it. I looked into
he's a
it,
smart
and
guy.
you have to look into these things to be sure and to verify. And there is an incredible amount of science behind this, and like I said, it was developed by a PhD.
Yeah, I mean, well, the science there, and the reason why you want to go ahead and take
not gonna give it up.
Take your Zeobiotics before you indulge is because alcohol is, when it's metabolized in your gut, turns into a toxic byproduct. People think being dehydrated is the reason why you feel bad after a big night, but no, not true. It's the toxic byproduct that alcohol is metabolized into. Zeobiotics kicks that right out.
I love it. All right. So vacations, weddings, birthdays, and reunions. There's so much going on. We all have it going on this time of year. Get the most of your spring plans by stocking up on pre-alcohol now. Go to zbiotics.com, #Ruthless, and get 15% off your first order. Use Ruthless at the checkout. ZBiotics is backed by a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money. No questions asked. Remember, head to zbiotics.com/Ruthless and use the code Ruthless at checkout. It's 15% off. Thank you for ZBiotics for sponsoring this episode and all of our good times, right, fellas?
That's right.
Is that full, by the way? Because I feel like...
No,
Oh my gosh,
it's
we're
not.
all out.
I took them.
Mug
you did
took
this?
them all.
The last time we did one of these, I was like, I need more, and so I took them.
I love how he immediately confessed that he took them all.
Yeah.
I took them.
Unbelievable.
I mean, it's recording week.
It works. So
We have a heavy recording week. Wolf, we got to get on these things.
Yeah, they need to send more.
And I mean it. I mean it. Like, I'm not even joking. Like, sometimes this is a bit. It's not a bit. I need this. Very important that we have it. All right. So the big segment that we're dealing with here is election analysis, and you heard the Carville thing. What I think that gets into is this larger issue that if you're a Democrat, you're looking at stuff and you're like, oh boy. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're honest, this is a very bad feeling. You know, we've all worked on campaigns where at some point things look pretty dark and you start searching for answers and trying to figure out a way to punch your way out of this thing. If you're a Democrat and you're not trying to figure out answers, I don't know what you're doing, because the New York Times released the Siena poll on Monday. I just give you a little. There's a grand total of one state that we're talking about that's relevant to getting to 270 in a national election where he's winning. It's Wisconsin, and it's up by 2.
Yeah, for the folks on YouTube, that graphic right there, I mean, that is why Carville was freaking out. That gap right now that you're seeing in all the swing states except Wisconsin, you see this in Pennsylvania, Arizona, Michigan, Georgia, Nevada. Trump has the lead, and in like Nevada, Georgia, even in Michigan, that is a huge gulf between Biden and Trump.
Yeah, I mean, in Nevada, you're looking at Trump at 50.
Yeah.
That's the
At
wildest
50.
part about it.
And Biden down at 39. I mean, that is a base motivation problem that Joe Biden and the Democrats have, 100%.
100%. We've talked a lot in the program, you recall, about the Democratic theory of the case being in all of these swing states, they don't believe that President Trump can get to 48 or above. Mm-hmm. They think, and that's why they're obsessed with third parties and everything else. Well, if you look at it now, 49 in Arizona, 49 in Michigan, 49 in Georgia, 50 in Nevada. I mean, that shatters that theory of the case. I'm not sure that they're totally wrong. This might be a kind of a moment in time, or it might be a little hot of a sample, but the theory is being tested right now if you're a Democrat.
So what we didn't have in this graphic is the multi-candidate results from Siena, which I think you'll find interesting because you just mentioned Nevada, where they have Trump at 44 and Biden at 30 on a ballot that includes RFK Jr.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And they put him at 11. So if on the two-way they have Biden at 38 and he shrinks to 30 on the multi-candidate, that is a terrible situation for an incumbent to be in, because how is he going to get those voters back? They know everything there is to know about him.
Just by, and this is why you should have a little skepticism about polls in May, and I'm not specifically attacking this one, but kind of all of them in general. I mean, the idea that a national party nominee, let alone a president of the United States, is below 40 at any point in time should be taken with a grain of salt. You could put your name and your name on a national ballot, give them an R and a D.
I'd be the R.
You're going to get to 45 plus.
Yeah.
End of discussion. Like there is no chance in any of these states that Joe Biden is not at 45.
Maybe to your point, maybe the sample is a little bit off for this particular poll in Nevada. But I think the point remains that Biden is in real trouble.
Yeah.
Yes, no question about it. It also reflects a bunch of different things, right? You capture different moments of time in terms of a respondent's willingness to answer questions. And sometimes what you get is a particularly low moment for one party or another where they're going to vote for their guy, but they don't want to talk about it. They certainly don't want to take a survey of it, and they're not going to talk about it at the country club or the softball game or whatever it is that they're doing. They're just kind of internalizing.
Yeah, they're like they're constantly demoralized, kind of like being like a Minnesota Vikings fan. You know, you just don't know if you're ready to talk about it.
It's just fucking rude.
But you're still gonna watch the games.
I just want the audience to know that you hit a pole in the garage the other day with your car. You backed right
Unbelievable.
You backed right into it.
His gloves are off.
And he damaged his car.
Out of left field.
And it's no fault of his own.
It isn't.
But anyway, now that we're airing out each other's dirty laundry, I figured it was worth a shot. J.J. McCarthy's going to be the MVP of the NFL next year. So you just deal with all of that. The money piece is also another conversation worth having. Up to this point, it has been a lot to a little in terms of Democrat versus Republican fundraising. That's top of the ticket all the way down. And there's still an element of that, no question about it. But according to Axios, RNC, in March, they raised $65 million. In April, $76 million. Half of small dollar increments, right? So that's what? How do we define that? Like $35?
Yeah, about an average gift of about 35.
So he's got an edge. Biden still, I'll just read a little couple paragraphs to set the table. While Donald Trump is on trial in New York, his team is restructuring the Republican National Committee. President Biden's team is aggressively campaigning and advertising, a reflection of Biden's early fundraising advantage. Democrats have long had an edge in fundraising, but Trump's super PACs and outside groups are helping to even the playing field, even as the ex-president's legal fees eat into his funds. At the end of March, Biden's campaign Democrat National Committee had nearly double the cash on hand the RNC and Trump had. But even when adding Trump's main super PAC, MAGA Inc., the Biden campaign, the DNC, had just a little bit more cash, but overall outside groups supporting Trump are helping him close the gap. I guess the point is the tsunami that everybody was talking about has eased into like maybe a Cat 1 hurricane at this point.
I mean, so that has always been my greatest worry is that yes, it's evident to any sane American that 4 years of Trump were better than 4 years of Biden, that things are getting worse under Biden. He has no idea what he's doing. My concern has always been if the Democrats and these billionaires who back them just unleash this tidal wave of money, like they're planning to, and like I'm certain they will, is that enough to get him across the finish line? Because they can saturate the airways with the amount of money they're going to have.
They have so much money, but we have so much enthusiasm. And I actually have a question for our resident expert on digital fundraising here. Michael, they say that half of this money that is coming into the RNC is small dollar. Is that because small dollar donors are finally like, you know what, that 14,000% match actually does sound like a good idea? Or is it because they're thinking Trump is on the march, and I think we could actually win this thing if I participate?
Yeah, I mean, I think Trump is the number one mobilizing force for small dollar donors in our politics and has been since the moment he stepped down the golden escalator. So the fact that the primary's over, the Republican primary is over, and he is the nominee, and plus he's facing this trial in New York, sort of galvanizes all these small dollar donors, and the RNC being able to use his name in fundraising appeals helps as well, because they had to keep neutral during the primary. So I anticipate Donald Trump's going to raise a lot into his campaign from small dollar donors. And frankly, he has to. I love seeing all the numbers about outside groups and super PACs and all of that sort of stuff. But like candidate to candidate, you got to have that candidate money as well, because as we've talked here numerous times on the program, like a dollar is not a dollar if it's at a super PAC versus a campaign. Every dollar is not equal. Candidates get candidate rates on television. And so a candidate has to raise the resources to be able to saturate the airwaves.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of discussion and criticism about RNC, Ronna stepping down and Trump sort of integrating it with his campaign and like all of the various, that stuff's hard to do. But it strikes me is that, what are we, 6 weeks into that? You look at the results of it, it seems like they're doing what they want to be doing, right? I mean, RNC to me looks like it is off the mat and starting to make real progress, particularly on the small dollar side, to start to begin to have some of those hard dollars that we were talking about. The outside group is one thing, but being able to put hard dollars in place where your team is integrated with the campaign, that's another. And it's hard to do, but it's hard to see how they're not making progress on that.
I mean, also, I think they're fortunate in that for a while, Ashbrook, it doesn't feel like the Biden and the Democrats have been in this like doom news cycle of where they go from news cycle to news cycle, and it's like Biden's failing on this, or it's like his party is divided on this. Half the party's going after this, and like even in the reporting in journalism, where you have like half of the journalists being like, "Oh, I sympathize with these crazy college kids or whatever," or "I never saw any violence there except for some kids punching some other kid," but all the news cycles now, it's not like you get a news cycle where it's like, oh, look, Biden just got some like signature bill passed. You know, it's been just one crisis to another. You hear, oh, now Iran's firing rockets. Oh, now like kids, police are having to show up on campus because they're tearing up their buildings.
I've told you about my friends at Americans for Prosperity. You know, the ones who bought the Bidenomics.com website right from under Joe Biden's nose. They're the largest, most effective grassroots organization in the country. Following up on their Bidenomics coup, AFP is now launching a national Bidenomics tour to expose the weak Biden economy and hold the lawmakers who voted with Biden accountable. Americans will hear the facts and figures the mainstream media won't tell you about. How Joe Biden and his allies ignored warnings their policies would trigger runaway prices. How inflation is killing homeownership in the American dream, and how workers keep falling behind. And if the Bidenomics.com website is anything to go by, you can be sure it will be a lot of fun, too. To check out when the AFP Bidenomics tour is coming to your area, go to Bidenomics.com. That's Bidenomics.com. We heard about Jim Carville. I know there's another Democrat who's out there.
There is. Mark Penn, a former Clinton advisor. He writes, this is in the New York Times, that Biden's doing it all wrong. I mean, it sounds pretty similar to what Carville was saying. They're two Clinton Democrats back from the 90s. President Biden appears to be behind in all the swing states, and his campaign appears all too focused on firming up his political base on the left with his new shift on Israel, a $7 trillion budget, massive tax increases, failing to connect on basic issues of inflation, immigration, and energy.
Yep, seems right.
I mean, that's the truth.
I think their problem is twofold. Number one, voters don't actually know what Biden's trying to sell of his accomplishments in the last 4 years.
Well, and he hasn't had an agenda for a year and a half.
Right. I mean, but even like the infrastructure bill, you know, like actual awareness in the electorate of what he did and what he wants to say and claim credit for out of that, the electorate has no idea what that is. So they're going to have to devote a lot of resources to explaining what they had already done. But that really only gets you halfway because elections ultimately are about the future. Does anyone in this room have any fucking idea what Joe Biden's next 4 years would look like and what they're selling?
No.
It's not clear to anyone in the electorate what the next 4 years of a Joe Biden administration would deliver. Yeah, I mean, there's some sort of idea of protecting democracy, but what the hell is that? As Carville said, nobody cares about that. Nobody knows what that means.
I mean,
you got the other guy on trial in New York, and you're talking about protecting democracy?
Yeah, like what the hell are you talking
It's just so dissonant. They have no actual message, and that ultimately is their problem.
That's the thing, is like when he spoke, Carville, in the specific context of like the protecting democracy, he's like, that's not working anymore. Well, it just laid bare how this was just bullshit shenanigans.
Because that's who he's attacking, right? Like that's his subtweet of the quote-unquote tastemakers in the Democratic Party who really feel like they can win this whole thing on talking about how Donald Trump's a threat to democracy. And frankly, that's not going to work.
And nobody buys it.
No.
And also on infrastructure. You mentioned infrastructure. The only thing people know about infrastructure is there's a bridge in Baltimore that collapsed just a few weeks ago. I mean, like nobody's talking about Joe Biden filling potholes. Yeah. Nobody's talking about Joe Biden doing anything good. He's this week, he is going to try to act like he cares about the border. What he's not going to do is anything about the 20 million people who came in freely on his watch. What he's not going to do is anything about the guys who are 18 years old, who are here from Senegal, not taking out applications at the Home Depot, if you know what I'm talking about. Like, these guys are here to do us harm. And Biden has done nothing about it, and he's not going to do anything about it. He's going to pass some kind of an executive order to make it look like he cares about the border. I have a feeling Republicans are going to call him out. President Trump is going to call him out.
That's right.
So, look, since 1996, there has been one theory of the case for incumbent presidents, and that is solidify your base and you're going to be fine. Because there's an inherent advantage with incumbents, inherent advantage with this sort of center right of the electorate in particular, of people who are just like, they want some normalcy, they want stability. And they're not interested in sort of like the sloshing back and forth in the left and right. So incumbents have an advantage with that. Bush executed this exactly that way in 2004. I would argue that Obama did exactly this in 2012. And you're seeing now in 2024, Biden have that same model. But it started with everything they campaigned on being a caretaker, somebody who's just sort of like going to restore normalcy, adults in the room, foreign policy, all these things. Enough with the chaos. And then this first like month did everything on a partisan basis, created the inflation crisis, all of these things. And instead of doing the Bill Clinton, I feel your pain, tacking towards welfare reform or something that indexes center right, they just stayed hard left. Mm-hmm. And events intruded upon that with October 7th with Israel, which is why I think this is such a big deal, because his gut instinct on it was to pursue the right policy vis-a-vis the United States and supporting our only ally in the region and doing all of these sort of right things. Where it ended up was now a political problem where he sees a base cleavage.
Yeah.
That goes back to, if I just have my base, I'll be fine. And that's why he's triangulating. That's why he's doing all of these things. But it's exposed what now Carville and Mark Penn are talking about, in that you're not actually appealing to the people who made you president of the United States in the first place at all.
Yeah. So I have, especially when it comes to these swing states, I have this crazy theory that there is a very central problem right now in Biden's base, where I feel like a ton of them voted for him in 2020 on the premise of they were like, yeah, like a caretaker, all right, like anyone but Trump kind of a thing. Like they weren't voting for Biden. They're like, they just want to change from Trump. They were mad about Trump, right? But I think Biden, in his own mind, took it as like a mandate. Like, I think a lot of the people who supported him figured he's only got 4 years in him. They weren't like, I'm voting for Joe Biden because I want to give him 8 years of transforming this country.
Yeah.
And so that's why the support to me is going to remain soft. Like, that could be a very fundamental problem if that theory holds, that the voters that supported him weren't like, oh, I'm with Joe Biden 100%. This is a mandate. They were like, well, I mean, I just don't like Trump right now.
Mm-hmm. So if you look at all the states and the Siena poll and all these things are out, I think the fundamental question, and one that we'll put to our audience, you guys did a great job last week when we asked this and put in the comments a question that we were talking about, but which swing states do you think Trump is going to win?
Yeah.
What we're talking about is Georgia predominantly, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona. Right? Well, that's the universe. I mean, you could throw the North Carolinas and the Ohios in there. I think he's pretty good shape in all of those.
Yeah.
So predominantly we're talking about the upper Midwest, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. Comment. Like, come back to us. Like, give your thoughts on this show. What do you think? You probably live in these states. Like, what do you think?
And what I'm going to do is I'm bookmarking this episode, and then after Election Day, I'm going to come back and be like, who's the next Nate Silver? Like, who actually nailed it?
Who are the people who totally get it?
Because, you know, in all honesty, you have to sit there and listen to the bullshit from pundits on TV all day long, and nobody knows states better than the people who are actually living there, talking to their friends, and have something important to say. And that's why I'm eager to read everything people are putting into the comments.
Yeah. Totally agree. So anyway, get on that. We'll read many of them, and we'll digest all of them. You guys ready for some variety?
Yes.
Always.
This one's fantastic.
Yeah.
Smug, you picked this one out first.
All weekend we were laughing about this.
We were laughing about this all weekend.
I was like, this is some genius shit.
So this is the Linwood Times.
Yeah.
I'm unfamiliar with the publication, but they do great work, evidently. There's an article entitled 3 Bob Fergusons Now Running for Governor as Race Takes a Turn for the Weird.
So, like, that's the thing is, I saw this. I read the link. I was like, so I'm not familiar with the Linwood Times. I was like, is this kind of like some like satire website, you know, like 3 Bob Fergusons on the ballot?
Yeah.
I Googled it, and this is for real. And then, like, I went on one of the Bob Fergusons, the incumbent Bob Ferguson, Democrat Bob Ferguson, and, like, he's saying this is an attack on democracy.
All right,
it's
so
just absurd.
Here's
it's unreal.
the conservative Republican activist threw a monkey wrench into the race, recruiting 2 last-minute Democratic candidates who share the same name as the party's presumed frontrunner. Newcomers, one from Yakima, the other from Graham, will now share the August 6th primary ballot with Attorney General Bob Ferguson. In all, 30 candidates have filed for the race. Glenn Morgan, a political conservative who has a knack for annoying elected Democrats and their progressive allies, cooked up this maneuver that immediately drew flack from the Attorney General's camp as an attempt to confuse voters. Morgan said that it had been in recent weeks in the works for a while and contacted some of the 53 Washington residents named Bob Ferguson. So he actually went and recruited Bob Ferguson.
He put in the work.
I mean,
It's very clever.
I'm all for it, and I guess I would just respond to Attorney General Bob Ferguson and say, if they're voting in a Democratic primary, those voters are already very confused.
Yeah. I think that's a good point.
But so it reminds me of that old school movie with Eddie Murphy called Distinguished Gentleman.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Great movie.
Oh, if you haven't
Was
seen
that the one
it.
where it was like none of the above?
No, it was basically like it was like Jeff Jefferson or something. His name. It may not be exactly that, but it was something like that, where he was just like a dude who put his name on a ballot and won the election as Jeff Jefferson, and then became a congressman. The whole thing. The funniest thing with '80s Eddie Murphy movies is they hold up like a motherfucker.
Oh, they do. They 100% do.
They totally do. Like if you watch Beverly Hills Cop today, you will laugh your ass off.
Yeah.
Mostly because of what you're not able to do today that they were able to do then. And this just fits in that category in a lot of different ways.
This guy watched the movie
comedy.
and he was like, you know what? He gets at the phone book.
He got it done.
Well, don't you remember a few cycles ago when that Democrat in Alabama won the primary because his name was Al Green?
Yeah. Oh, dude.
And he'd only raised like $500.
It's the single funniest. We thought that it was like, remember when Stephen Colbert was at the Daily Show and he did kind of like a rightish meme? It
Yeah.
wasn't like he was now at late night television where he's just like a left-wing psychopath. It was like,
He used to be a comedian.
yeah, he used to be a comedian. We thought for a long time that this was a bit because they recruited this guy named Al Green in South Carolina. It may have been the home of the actual Al Green, the singer, and he didn't do anything, right? He just put his name on a ballot, and that was it.
Yeah, he didn't print out signs, didn't send out mail, none of that.
And there was a Democrat they were trying to run against, Jim DeMint.
Jim DeMint, yeah.
Right? And so they thought he was kind of vulnerable, and so they had like a pretty distinguished office holder as a Democrat who got blown out of the water by Al Green. And then
That's right.
the day after the primary, they show up and they stick a microphone in Al Green's face. And they're like, Al, what do you think it was about your message that resonated with voters? And he's like, establishment. And like, that's all he had.
Yeah.
I mean, there was literally...
It's really not much of an exaggeration.
No, I mean...
It was wild.
I think it's still on YouTube.
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
It is one of the funniest. If we can find that, Wolf, we got to put that in because you will not believe your eyes. But it seems to me like this is what they're going for. Anyway, the Democratic governor, not happy. Not happy about the Bob Ferguson. She says that in a statement that she issued on behalf of his campaign. The
former governor saying this.
Yeah, but like on behalf of the OG Bob Ferguson, that it's calling it a last-minute filing, a highly deceiving and potentially illegal effort to mislead voters.
Nothing illegal about participating
I mean,
in the democratic process.
This is actual real democracy.
It is.
Why shouldn't every Bob Ferguson be allowed to have a voice? You know?
I wish I could see like just a hidden cam or something on the face of voters when they go in the Democratic primary and there's 3 Bob Fergusons.
I mean, it is genius. I'm wondering if the ballot is going to have to do something.
They have to like specify
Like put
some difference,
incumbent
right?
Yeah.
or something.
Or maybe like
But
nicknames.
I think it'd be wrong if they did that.
They usually do incumbent, right? Like a...
I always just see party affiliation in parentheses.
I think every state's different.
I think the first one to start going by Bobby's going to win this thing.
Well, hold on. Under state law, if 2 or more candidates file for the same office with names similar enough to confuse voters, information can be added to the ballot to differentiate them. Additional information will not be provided for any other candidate. So, like, the incumbent gets like hey, I'm your guy. Yeah, it seems
See, that's an attack.
That's
on
a threat to
democracy.
democracy.
That is unbelievable.
The other Bob Fergusons are without franchise whatsoever. Unbelievable.
The man keeping them down.
Completely disgusting. A disgusting act. as they
You know
say.
what? It is very funny. And in the pre-lunatic left-wing era, Stephen Colbert would have covered this thing, and it would have made it very funny.
Yeah.
It
So
would have.
I wish our show was bigger. I wish we had enough budget and time to be able
Well,
to
I'd
go
go
out there.
interview these guys. I'd want to know everything that there is to know about these people.
Yeah.
Smug would be out there, man on the street style.
Yeah. Be like, which Bob Ferguson?
How do we know that you're the real Bob Ferguson?
The funniest thing is his Twitter account, where it's like, I think it was.
you
his,
looked into those.
Yeah, I think it was his mother or something. He took a photo with like, "Happy Mother's Day. Remember, voting for the other Bob Fergusons is an attack on democracy." I'm not kidding. He's really saying shit like that. The like currently elected Bob Ferguson is like, "Remember, voting for the other Bob Ferguson is an attack on democracy."
Man, they don't. They got
Like,
one
this
note.
Mother's Day, bro. Just like stay home for a day.
All right, you want some animal stuff?
Always.
Mix some stuff in. Man or bear, a viral question has spawned scary responses, according to CNN. Can we get clip 2 on this thing, Spagats?
Would you rather be stuck
Oh
in
my
a
God.
forest with a man or a bear?
Bear. Man is scary. With a bear.
What I've heard about bears, they don't always attack you, right? Unless you like fuck with them. So maybe a bear.
Depends what man, but probably a bear.
Oh, 100% a bear, which is like terrifying to say, but
Definitely a bear. Some men are very scary out there.
a bear.
I would say a man.
Okay. Well, I mean, with the exception of the last one, and maybe for our audio-only listeners, maybe the third one, I'd take the bear as well. So maybe that we're talking about an equity thing here.
It's just, I think a lot of this is just how insane the world has become, partially because the media has pushed people. Like, we've been told now that, like, oh, all men are just dangerous threats, you know? Like, at the same time you're being told all men are trash, all men are toxic. Now that they're competing in women's sports ostensibly as women, that's actually a heroic thing. So, like, the left has pushed this idea of the normal, reasonable man is actually the greatest threat you will face.
Right.
You know, where to the point that they think they're actually safer with a bear who will kill them.
Do they really
than just
think,
a normal dude?
Do they really think that, though?
Or do they think it's fashionable to
Do you think
say?
it's fashionable to just hate men and think that they're all murderers and rapists? Like, I feel like it's related to your point, Smug, that is like the media perpetuates this notion that men are toxic and terrible, so people feel comfortable saying absurd things like that. Like, okay, maybe the bear's not going to attack you, but I'm sure he's much more likely to attack you than the man you're randomly in the woods with being a rapist or a murderer.
No, but that's the thing. Is like,
you know what I mean?
I think the whole like left of being essentially the Chinese Revolution of where everyone has to stick to the same points, and you get publicly shamed if you don't agree with
I think you're
whatever
right.
the Instagram post of the month is. You know, whatever the current thing is, you have to agree with that. I think there's such a like fear and like crowd mentality to it that it gets internalized. So like, I mean, pretty much every stance that the Democrats have right now, reason is not able to penetrate that level of like
so
stupidity
sad,
and
but true.
brainwashing. You know, like a dude is not a woman because he decides he is once he's running a marathon against women. But they've made it that like you could be considered a bigot if you think that science doesn't work. You know, it's insanity. The point that they've gotten now is I'd rather be with a bear and possibly die than just an average dude.
Just an average dude. Well, not surprisingly, this whole thing originated on TikTok.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
I wonder if you did this in China, whether they would have the same results. I kind of doubt it. But it seems like all your points are very well taken. This is a analysis of like they've done these videos. They've been viewed over 70 million times.
And I've seen like online, even people on Twitter having this discussion and stuff, and it is insane how far things have gotten to the point where so many women are like, yeah, I'd pick a bear.
Oh, God. Some of this stuff is hilarious, too. It's like the bear, because if I got attacked by the bear, people would believe me.
Oh, come on. So
See,
that's
what
what
I mean.
it is. It's
Duncan's
not
right.
about the bear.
That's trying to get their quota.
The bear is totally like a red herring in this whole thing. It's just there's women who want to project that all men are evil and rapists and murderers, and so this gives them an opportunity to talk about how terrible we are. It's just a patently absurd thing. It's a bear.
Yep.
What a failure in culture.
Yeah.
It is. That's
What
100%.
what a failure. It's the same thing, by the way, that leads us to like gays for Gaza.
Right.
Yep.
right?
That's
Where they're
exactly it.
like, it's the same thing. They're like, oh, no, I'm all for Gaza because I'm all for those people. And the people in Gaza are like, I will murder you.
Yeah. I would kill you if you're right.
Yeah. and the CCP loves this propaganda, which is, I'm sure, why they're going to amplify it on TikTok as far as they can, because, I mean, their battle against the West is also a battle of birth rates. Frankly, it really is.
Damn, he nailed that.
The old man. Wisdom.
He's right, you know.
He knows.
Wisdom
true.
beyond his years.
Yeah.
That's what he provides here for the listeners of the Variety Program.
The old man is a patient man, but it's not without its limit.
I love it. All right, so we're going to go to a very interesting interview. I think you'll get a lot out of this. This is Brody Mullins. I want to welcome to the program a good friend. Been around a long time in this line of work. Ashbrook and I think we've known you for far too long, frankly. He's the kind of guy who, when you're working comms in political Washington, D.C., when his name shows up on your caller ID, you got to think twice about answering it. One of those kind of guys. But he's written an incredible book, and we wanted to have him on because he's done more work in this area than anybody else. Brody Mullins, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. It was great.
Listen, I'm looking at your book, and I've heard a lot about it lately, and I'm not even sure. When's your official release date?
A couple days ago. So we're out.
So
we're
you're
official.
Out. So, but I felt like for a month I'm hearing about this book, which is when we booked all of this and everything else. It's The Wolves of K Street. You guys are going to love this because of all of the following you're about to hear from Brody and others. But by way of background, you were at the Wall Street Journal. You had a lot of different journalism jobs over the years.
Yeah, I started off at a place called Communications Daily, just covering the FCC. I went to Congress Daily, covering Congress, obviously, but there I covered the Energy and Commerce Committee and the Senate Commerce Committee, which is where, as you know, a lot of the business of Congress is done. So I sort of got to know the lobbyists and kind of covered industries. Like I covered Congress and committees and subcommittees for 6 or 7 years, and never once did anything I cover become a law. But you learn so much about how Congress, because those committees did a lot.
Yeah.
They affected a lot of change. They made policy. They just didn't do it by making an actual law.
Which is different, right? I mean, most people don't understand that.
Right. But most reporters, run over to the House and Senate floors and think that's where stuff happens. But by the time somebody's gotten to the House and Senate floor, it should be done.
It's already baked.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so listen, there's nobody who knows K Street in the influence sector more than this guy, but he's also just a handsome writer when it comes to putting all of this into prose and making it interesting. Tell us about your process with putting this particular book together. What was it you were trying to accomplish and communicate?
So the handsome writing is my brother. I don't get credit for that. I'm an ugly writer. So what we're trying to do is sort of show two things. One is how lobbying has changed in Washington over the last 20, 30 years. And also something we didn't know, which is how companies sort of first came to power in Washington and maybe how that power is eroding now. I mean, for all the time that, us four have been in Washington, companies have been incredibly powerful. But about the time we started writing the book, which was 2017, that power started to fade a little bit. I mean, the pro-business, bipartisan center in D.C. is dead or dying. Trump didn't exactly do that himself, but he was a part of it. And to me, that's fascinating because, again, for my entire lifetime, companies ruled.
Yeah.
And now things are changing. Now, is someone else taking their place? I don't think so. I mean, unions are not powerful. Public interest groups aren't powerful. There's no Ralph Naders of the world. But someone's going to come into this vacuum at some point. I'm really not sure who that is. But the point that we found so interesting is that it hasn't. I thought for our entire country's history, companies have been powerful, and that's not true. It really just started in the 70s, increased in the 80s, and into now fading. So we could be witnessing just an era that maybe when our kids, if they work in Washington, someone else will be in power and influential. That's not companies, but we'll see.
So you open with a pretty interesting vignette.
Yeah, so Luke and I thought if we're writing a book about corporate lobbying, money, and power, which for most people outside of Washington is incredibly boring, you have to make it into a good story, into a narrative, and in our case, into a mystery. So we start with a dead body on a golf course, and I don't want to give away too much, but that dead body was a lobbyist, a big lobbyist for a drug company here. He got involved in a scandal that led to his death. But more broadly, the fact that his scandal could take place, that he could get in trouble, sort of shows how lobbying has changed from where it was 10 or 15 years ago, where every lobbyist was registered, their activities were disclosed, people knew who their clients were and who what their activities were, and now lobbying is moving more outside Washington, and people don't know where that money is, which opened the door for a whole series of events that led to this guy dead on a golf course.
Which is a wild way to start a money and power deal, especially when you're dealing with nonfiction, right? I mean, look, we all hear about all the horror stories. This is actually one of them that had happened in recent memory. People knew this person and what they were involved in, and it is a gateway to a larger story, as you mentioned. But it sort of follows throughout, where you're dealing with different nuances of how people have done the job of lobbying.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, we're trying to get readers to follow our story. And one of the best compliments we've gotten so far is from a family member who said, hey, is this fiction or nonfiction? Did you just make this up? Which means, like, that's a good story.
Yeah, right.
Because we didn't make it up. It's all true. It all happened. But the whole story fits together really nicely. We follow, including this guy, 3 lobbying dynasties in Washington, and how they've moved from the tactics and strategies of the 1980s to how lobbying is today. So it's a lot of fun. We had a good time working on it, and Luke and I are still friends, which is important.
That is important, Johnny.
Yeah, and it takes a long time to report something like that out. I mean, you mentioned that you started working on it in 2017, and that today you're at the top of a couple of bestseller lists. Am I right about that?
Yeah, as of now, we're top among political books, among books about government. Somehow, we're also the top of the list of books about human rights. I'm not sure how this is a human rights book, but according to Amazon, we're #1 bestseller in human rights issues.
Is that right?
Lobbyists are people too.
So I sent that one to my parents, so hopefully they're proud of us.
Right.
But I mean, I think that fits the bill of something rocketing to the top of the charts if it's only been here for like a couple of days. I mean, I put in for a pre-order on the book on Amazon and got it over the weekend, so I'm assuming that's when everybody else got it. And I think the numbers are only going to come up as people start hearing about it, because there is a great distrust out there in our country for what happens in Washington. Things that people don't see, people don't necessarily understand, certainly don't appreciate and don't like. And I wonder if you could talk about like some of the things that you've seen, like the rise of populism, not just on the right, but also on the left a little bit too, and how you've done some interviews on the left and some on the right, and what you think people are how they're interpreting this book.
Yeah, we've seen it be doing pretty well on the right and the left, in part because there's increasing criticism of corporate America on both sides. I mean, when we were writing the book and it was coming out, I certainly thought that liberal groups and Democrats would really eat this up and blame corporations for everything that's wrong. What we were sort of surprised about is the amount of interest it's gotten on the right. And our book it comes in 3 chapters or 3 sections, and the last section is about sort of the declining influence of companies. And we say in there that there are a bunch of tangible steps that Republicans have taken in the last few years to bash companies. Not just Trump was mainly just rhetorical, but Josh Hawley in Missouri, incredibly popular on the right. He has 3 or 4 bills co-sponsored with Elizabeth Warren. One to cap credit card fees, another to help Americans join unions, another to claw back bonuses for failing banks. Mm-hmm. And, those bills are perfectly fine, but you just expect those to be liberal Democrats and have Josh Hawley on those bills, and sometimes Tom Cotton, and sometimes Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance. And it seems like, what I can't tell is this a movement or is it just 7 people who are off the reservation? Mm-hmm. But it seems like every time a Rob Portman leaves Congress, a Josh Hawley, a J.D. Vance comes in, mm-hmm. and that seems to be a trend. And then you've got Marco Rubio, who just sort of switched himself. So it seems like there's like an older generation of pro-business Reagan country club Republicans that's being phased out and replaced by these Josh Hawley, J.D. Vance characters. And that to me is fascinating because it's just different from my whole life here.
Mm-hmm.
What changed in lobbying? What used to work in lobbying that you see has fundamentally changed with this rise of populism on the political side?
I think a huge misnomer or mischaracterization of lobbying outside of Washington is that it's a game played with cozy relationships and campaign donations and rounds of golf and steak dinners. And that's how things worked in the Jack Abramoff era. Mm-hmm. The first lobbyist we write about is Tommy Boggs. who is the ultimate insider in Washington. His dad was a member of Congress. His dad rose up to be the House Majority Leader before his plane disappeared in a plane crash in Alaska. To replace him, New Orleans elected his mom, who served for 10 or 12 years on the Ways and Means Committee. So this is a guy who grew up with both parents as members of Congress. LBJ would come to his house. He worked for LBJ. He knew every president. He knew every politician, and he got things done because companies would pay him a lot of money. He'd give campaign checks. He'd go talk to his buddies, over drinks or golf, and magically things would appear in the law. That's how people think it works still, and it obviously doesn't. So one of the things we say is like, hey, that era is over. And now members of Congress need to know that whatever they're voting for has the support of their constituents. So as you know, a lot of lobbying is now getting the support of those constituents. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot more sophisticated. There's a lot more money. In a way, it's more democratic. I mean, a member of Congress is following their constituents. So let's get the constituents to support whatever a company wants. So that's really how lobbying has changed. And I think most people think that it's, an insider game, and it's just not.
It's funny that you're doing this because I feel like it's, sort of one of those things where it's quite obvious to an awful lot of us who've worked in the industry, and nobody of your ilk has basically said, no, this is what's happening.
Well, it's an easier story. The other side's easier.
Yeah, yes, no question about it. And there's political capital to be gained by it. But I mean, look, I remember as a 30-year-old chief of staff on Capitol Hill, being entirely in the comms area, so I didn't deal with policymakers or lobbyists or whatever before I became chief of staff. And my initial impression of all of this was basically what I'd read. Like, these big power brokers, they come in, they raise a lot of money, and like you take their meetings and, you talk to them or whatnot. And my experience after a couple of years of doing it was, man, whatever the impression of the outside public about the way these interactions work certainly wasn't my experience. Mm-hmm. And more often than not, you get these big time lobbyists who come in and they'd ask for X, Y, and Z, and you'd sort of shake their hand, take the meeting, and off they went, and like that was it. Because if it didn't fit with your constituency, it didn't fit with the broader plan, like it just wasn't going to work. And external parts of the electorate, some of this is just internet based, right? I mean, there's more democracy in our democracy than maybe ever before because people are talking about it.
And not just talking, but also like, they're voting with their wallet too on these campaigns and stuff. So like the $5,000 PAC check doesn't have the cachet it once did. There's no more smoke-filled room because everybody's got thousands or hundreds of thousands of small dollar donors that counterbalance whatever a corporation could give a politician. It really has democratized the process.
Totally. But for all of that, then to sort of trace back from where we were, like you mentioned, Tommy Boggs and others, I mean, what sort of, do you have a line of demarcation in this that you sort of point to where you think, like, well, things just started not working on behalf of the Wolves of K Street at some point?
I think there's a couple times that things changed. I mean, a major pivot point for us was the 1993 Clinton healthcare bill, because that bill it was a different era back then. Both political parties were more aligned, and at least Republicans were less of bomb throwers, because Democrats had control at that point of Congress for almost 50 uninterrupted years. So if you wanted something done, you had to go be nice to Democrats. But in 1993, Bill Clinton was a relatively popular new president. Now, he'd only won with 43%, so he couldn't be incredibly popular. But he had just won. It was his first 100 days. He picked national health care to be his first priority. Democrats controlled the House. They controlled the Senate. About 70% of Americans said that they didn't like their health care plan. And this was his first bill out of the gate, and it seemed like he's going to get this and he's going to win. A little background also, the year before, Bob Dole and I think 17 or so Senate Republicans had a national health care bill themselves. Mm-hmm. So they even had some support among Republicans. But then Republicans got together and talked to a lot of corporate lobbyists really for the healthcare industry and said, like, hey, we can really defeat and wound Bill Clinton's presidency if we block this. And they did. And they did that through the first major outside lobbying campaign. Remember Harry and Louise and the television ads that were trying to, they basically ran a presidential campaign against the national health care bill. And they won. And they didn't just, the reason that's important is it's not just they beat one bill. if you remember, Bill Clinton then became a moderate after that. So this national health care bill is obviously a very
It changed
liberal
the course of
Democrat.
history,
Right,
yeah.
changed the course of history. He then became a moderate pro-business, not pro, basically a moderate, more centrist Democrat.
Well, certainly pro-business in comparison to where we're at right now. Right?
Yeah, certainly. And compared to other, more liberal Democratic predecessors, like LBJ and FDR. I mean, NAFTA was one of his big bills that was down the middle.
Famously, the era of big government is over.
Right.
That's Bill Clinton.
Right. That was Bill Clinton.
And reinventing government was Al Gore, his vice president. And then, NAFTA was his, and welfare reform. So you could say that he was a pro-business politician, but he did that after getting his butt kicked, by the corporate lobby and by the health insurance industry. So that's a really big pivot point. And also, sort of changed our politics since then, because in my opinion, the political party that's not in power saw that and said, hey, if we block a president's agenda, we can weaken him and maybe win back the control for that party. Think of Bush's Social Security plan not long later.
Great point.
Something that definitely should have passed. It was pretty easy too.
Yeah.
Very small change to Social Security to make it solvent for another 50 or 100 years.
Right.
But Democrats saw, hey, we can crush them, and they did.
Yeah, they totally. So it's sort of the partnership between the outside and the politics of the party outside of power, right? I mean, that's sort of the nexus of what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think not only did the corporate lobby become more powerful at that point, but political parties or political organizations saw they can use these policy fights to hurt the momentum or strength of a president.
So, look, Johnny and I will appreciate this because we've worked with you for years, but you've always been a student of things that sort of don't make sense, but all of a sudden are conventional wisdom in the policymaking business, and most of that can be tracked back to influence of K Street and that kind of thing. Were you always sort of drawn to that based on your early part of your career? And where did that become a passion project of yours?
This is a great question.
I haven't thought about this, so I don't know if it'll be a great answer. So I sort of, when I went to college, I was an economics major. I'm comfortable with numbers.
He likes math.
And I don't know if I like math, but it doesn't scare me. And I think there's people who are good at math or they're good at words, and so most of the people who are good at words become reporters, and they're afraid of math. And I kind of do both. And also, there's sort of a competitive advantage that if you cover numbers, there's fewer reporters trying to do the same thing. Right. But I think because I've been a reporter for a long time, I think it becomes boring writing about Congress passed X or Senator so-and-so introduces
all process.
Yeah, it's all process. So what's going on behind the scenes? What's moving from chess to checkers, or other way around, moving from checkers to chess. What's going on behind the scenes? What's the next play? And oftentimes it's lobbyists who are behind the scenes making things happen, or at least knowing what the next step is. So I feel like those stories are more complex, but they're more fun and they're more of a challenge, than writing about how many people are going to vote for a bill or the more the process story. So I've sort of been drawn to that because it's just more exciting, more fun.
But those kind of stories are also incredibly useful to readers because they're not stupid. They see a trend just like everybody else, and they're like, wait a minute, where is this coming from? I know it's not organic. There's no way that people organically arrive at this position just because. And so they're always curious. There is such an appetite. I mean, we hear this from our audience all the time. There's such an appetite for how does this stuff come together? What are the driving forces behind all of these politicians all of a sudden at the same time saying the exact same thing?
Yeah.
Or the president and members of Congress on the same message that's completely opposite of what they're thinking, And so I feel like it's an incredibly valuable service to readers.
So, well, thank you. So a couple things there. One is, when you go to college and you take your civics course or your government course, you learn about the three branches of government and you think that's how bills become law. And maybe they talk about the media a little bit, but no one talks about the lobbyists and the other influences on legislation. And the members of Congress need a ton of money now to run for Congress, and a lot of that money comes from corporate America and their PACs, and that's not discussed in civics classes. And one of the things we're saying in this book is hey, here's another huge factor influencing policy. And to go to more directly to your question, I think our chapter 19 or so is about this huge grassroots effort in 2012 or 13, I forget, that was orchestrated by Google to block, if you remember the SOPA PIPA bills.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And that was all completely run by big
I think you and
tech,
I talked
and
about that even in the era, about how sort of groundbreaking
that's
that
probably
was.
true.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's a bill that would have made modest changes to the internet, would basically require internet platforms to, for the first time, police some of the information on their networks. I mean, something that are on their platforms, something that like seems very obvious today, which we're still fighting about. Google said that bill would kill the internet. They ended up running a massive advertising campaign, but back then they didn't have many lobbyists, and they were facing off against the MPAA and the radio industry and Rupert Murdoch and actually the Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO. The biggest lobbies in D.C. were for that bill. At some point in the Senate, I think you might have been there, 99 out of 100 senators said they supported the bill. So like this thing was going to become law. What Google realized that while they didn't have the money, they had the users, they had the internet community, the country basically. So they organized what they call Shut Down the Internet Day, where on one day, 11 years ago, I believe, most websites shut down or went dark for a day. They put a banner on the website that said, "Hey, you're a member of Congress trying to kill the internet. Call them and tell them to back off." Within hours, that bill was dead. Yeah. Millions of Americans called or emailed their members of Congress. All the supporters of the bill fled, and that day, big tech became big tech. But it's a perfect example of, if you're a member of Congress, you see all this income, and you're like, what the hell is going on? And it's all these companies who are very smartly, I mean, it's a smart strategy, going to their consumers, going and getting them to lobby for them.
But to your point about the changing environment, TikTok tried to do the same thing. They tried to get all of the kids who were on TikTok to call their member of Congress, and it sort of backfired on them. So it
was like an example of why it is we should be concerned about this rather than the alternative.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great question. I have not looked into that enough to know, but you're right. That should have worked. Why did it not work? Are you saying that it's because members are now getting more savvy to this? And if so, what's the next iteration? There'll be something next. There's a new strategy.
Right, it's just such a dynamic environment. It's like that you can't take yesterday's playbook and expect it to work tomorrow. And it's very interesting, which is why I'm hoping this isn't the last book that your guys are going to write.
Well, great question. We are thinking about doing another book. I think this topic of the rise of the populists and the changes in the Republican Party that we talked about a lot, I think is completely fascinating. I think that plays out in antitrust. I mean, antitrust is a really boring topic, but our country has encouraged these big companies to become big companies. And now all of a sudden you've got people on the right and people on the left, Lena Khan and Josh Hawley, who are saying, hey, this is a problem. And I think the rest of our lives, like that's what we're going to be deciding is did we let these companies get too big, and how do we change that? I mean, it's interesting that there's just a small number of companies in almost every industry, airlines, tech, banking, and I feel like more and more Americans don't like that. And we're nowhere near a consensus or a solution, but I feel like the next 15 years, that's what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it follows and sort of tracks the rise of the internet, the democratization of democracy and policymaking and everything. And I know you don't really go into this in the book, but I'm curious, just having finished this incredible project, like, do you think it's a good thing? Like, do you think, I mean, obviously just money and politics and buying policy and all of that is a bad thing. We can all agree on that. I think the question is just outsourcing expertise entirely to how people feel on a day-to-day basis. Is like, if we arrived at better results?
Well, it's really a fascinating question, because most of the book we're finding reasons and examples why the corporate lobby is bad for America. And then at the end of the book, we say, well, now because of changes, members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats, are getting less money from corporate PACs. Corporations have less influence in Washington. Members are trying to raise money through small donors or billionaires. I mean, the political parties are now funded more by billionaires than traditional Republicans. And therefore, our politics has gotten more extreme. There's more extreme Republicans, there's more extreme Democrats, and all of a sudden it seems like, well, wait a second, maybe that corporate money was good. It's bringing people to the middle.
It's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? I mean, influence peddling, whether it's through a small dollar proliferation, as we've seen over the last 5 years, or whether it was corporate lobbying over the last 30 years.
Yeah, but like middle of the road voters who just want Like middle of the road voters who just want you to like fix the potholes, like they don't chip in $50 at a time.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Like that's the thing.
The thing about companies though is that, their activities are regulated and disclosed.
Yeah.
We know who they are. We know what they want. And by the way, who are they and what they want? They want things to get done. Mm-hmm. They want certainty. They want the country to move forward. They want policies that will help America and workers. And these billionaires, we have no idea what they want. So it seems like corporations are the problem and the solution.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. It's a fascinating topic. I'm glad you did it. But before I let you go, what's a story in here that you just became enraptured by that you thought was just fantastic?
There's so many in there. I think the best story is our dead body on the golf course. Yeah. I mean, he's our most interesting character. He shows us how lobbying has changed, and plus he's just a super interesting guy. His name is Evan Morris. Is someone who came to Washington not to change the world as a president or a member of Congress, but as a lobbyist. He saw that being a lobbyist, you have more power and certainly more money than members of Congress or even the president. And that sort of shows a big problem with how Washington is. Yeah. And then this guy just had his own personal flaws where no matter how much money he had, he needed more. No matter how much influence he had, he wanted more. And we've seen this story time and time again, but he just got too big for himself and came crashing down. It's a really epic story and collapse.
It's fantastic. Well, listen, you've done a great job, as you always do. One of the best reporters, investigative reporters, and campaign finance reporters, and influence in Washington reporters that any of us have worked with for a long time. Can't wait to get all the way through this book. Brody Mullins, thank you for coming in, bud.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Fascinating book, The Wolves of K Street. You can get it on anywhere that you get your books. And it's well worth the read. For those of you who are super into this stuff, I think the most fascinating part of it provides real color and interesting stories around like interesting personalities and things, and as lobbying has progressed and influence peddling and all of those things. But ultimately, the undergirding of it is like, for those of you who are sitting at home being like, all this stuff just gets done because there's like some fat cat in the room who's working around. Like his conclusion is basically like, not really. It may have used to, but not anymore. Mm. And it's up to you to decide whether that's good or bad. Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. Which I think is fascinating. It's just it's a modern day update to the things that we saw with like Gucci Gulch after the 86 Tax Act and all of the things that have spread to the widespread populism of Washington as an industry. And whether it is actually as you imagine it to be or whether it's a little different. And it seems to me that there's nuances involved in this. Anyway, it's good reporter. Happy to have him on. Glad he's not calling me for all the other things he used to call me about, which were much more difficult to handle on a day-to-day basis. We've got an outro today, fellas.
Oh, we got 5 stars.
Yeah. We got some stuff here. You know how we like to start all of that.
Oh, that's right. We do.
Yeah. And we always start all of these things with the voice, and so I don't see why we break trend. Let's go right to him.
Okay, this first one is from Carla, and Carla writes, excited to wake up on Tuesday and Thursday to listen to Ruthless. Really enjoy listening to all of you. As an older woman, I finally do not cringe when you drop the F-bomb, although I think Megyn Kelly drops it more than you all.
That's a fact.
There is a time and a place to ignite the bomb. And it's a picture of a bomb.
Yeah.
Nice emoji. Good emoji use.
You young guys use it appropriately.
Is she suggesting that maybe Megyn doesn't?
Well, she's more liberal with her usage.
She's far more filthy than we are.
Yeah.
And I think she would take that in good stand.
Oh yeah.
I think she would enjoy that.
We were taught to respect our elders, and this appears to be a generational permission slip.
You like that?
We'll take it. We're going to put it on our wall, Carla. Thank you.
We appreciate that immensely. Duncan, what else do we got?
Okay. Can we throw that one up there? This is from Obreza. Hilarious and sharp podcast. I also discovered Ruthless as a Megyn Kelly listener. I was hooked when I heard the knock 3 times riff.
That's a beauty.
I couldn't stop laughing. I also learned from the hosts and excellent guests. Thank you for such a funny and sharp podcast, Baby Lasagna. I laughed until I cried at that one. I love the Ruthless podcast more each time I listen. Heard you on Megyn Kelly again. Always a fan. Thank you for incredibly sharp and always witty shows. I can't stand Kristi Noem. And yes, I can't stand the puppy killer story. She's clearly a liar about those circumstances as well as others. I love
loves it.
Getting a blasting at the end of the 5 stars.
Yeah, I might as well put the barrel on the bat if you got the opportunity. Smug, what do we got?
So this is from the Queen 412323. There's something about Smug.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, this sounds like a good one. By all accounts, I should really dislike Smug. I'm a total dog lover. I'm a Rapid Rewards member on Southwest Airlines. I am a proud Italian American.
Oh, my God.
I can't help but laugh, though, at all of his hot takes. Ever since I discovered the program, it's a must-listen every Tuesday and Thursday. Thanks for the great content. Keep it coming.
Oh, it's
Thank
so
you
good.
so much.
I think this person the Queen gets this more than anybody. I mean, they understand
that was excellent.
you, Smug.
Excellent review, and thank you so much, everyone. Feel free. Leave those comments on the YouTube, too. We'll read those as well.
Yeah, exactly. Which swing states do you think Trump will win? If you're in those swing states in particular, leave us those comments, and then always give us your reviews.
Yeah.
We love the reviews. We're going to keep on doing this. I think Wolf tried to edge him out in favor of meat. And
we've revolted.
We wouldn't have it.
For you, dear listener.
We would not have it. So anyway, we also have a ton of awesome merch, which we should update, Dunks. Don't you think we should get some new merch?
Yeah, that's a
out there?
great idea. When's the last time you did anything?
Oh, my God.
Get your sewing machine over.
Okay. I think I can do that.
I love it. And that's at a subdomain.
It's at the subdomain, store.ruthlesspodcast.com.
Yeah, so you can get all your great stuff there. With that, fellas, I think we did it.
I think so. Absolute banger of an episode. Gentlemen, thank you so much to our guests. Look forward to that book, Wolves of K Street. I'm going to read it. Sounds pretty crazy. So, until next time, minions, keep the faith, hold the line, and own the libs. We'll see you on Thursday. Stay ruthless.